My name is Renata Voss. I'm 31 years old, and the day my grandmother's lawyer read her will out loud, my sister stood up in the middle of the office and called me a liar in front of 6 witnesses. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because for the first time in my life, I had something she wanted. She pointed at me across the conference table, her voice cracking with a fury I'd never heard from her before, and said, "She manipulated a dying old woman. That house is mine." The lawyer didn't even blink. He'd seen families do this before. But I sat there frozen, holding a folder with my name typed on it in my grandmother's own handwriting, wondering how love could turn into war this fast. Before I tell you what happened in that office, and what my sister did 3 days later when she broke into a house that was no longer hers, tell me, what time is it where you're watching from? Where are you tonight? I'm always curious how far these stories travel. My grandmother's name was Eleanor Voss, and she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. My parents divorced when I was 9, and after that, my mother remarried a man named Carl who made it very clear, in 100 small ways, that I was an inconvenience he'd inherited along with my mother. My older sister Vanessa adjusted. She learned to laugh at Carl's jokes, to agree with whatever opinion was loudest in the room, to make herself small in ways that made her big in their eyes. I never learned that skill. I asked too many questions. I cried at the wrong times. I existed too loudly for a house that wanted quiet children. So every summer, my parents shipped me off to Grandma Eleanor's farmhouse 2 hours outside the city, while Vanessa stayed home to be the good daughter. I used to think it was a punishment. It took me years to understand it was the only mercy anyone ever showed me. Eleanor didn't coddle me. She put me to work weeding her garden, taught me to can tomatoes, made me read a chapter of something out loud every night before bed whether I wanted to or not. But she also asked me questions nobody else asked. What do you think, Renata? Not what do you think I want to hear. What do you actually think? By the time I was 16, that farmhouse was the only place on earth where I didn't feel like I needed a costume. Vanessa visited twice in 15 years, both times for money. When Eleanor's health started failing 4 years ago, I was the one who drove out every weekend. I was the one who sat in waiting rooms reading insurance paperwork while my mother sent flowers from 3 states away with a card that said, "Get well soon, love you." Like Eleanor had a cold instead of a failing heart. I was the one who learned to give her insulin injections, who memorized which pills came before breakfast and which after, who slept on her pull-out couch for 6 weeks straight when she came home from her first hospitalization because she refused a stranger in her house. Vanessa called twice during all of that, once to ask if Eleanor had updated her will, once to ask if I thought the farmhouse would finally sell for real money once Eleanor was gone. I should have known then. I didn't want to know then. Eleanor passed in March, quietly in her own bed, with me holding her hand and a window open because she always said she wanted to hear the birds when it happened. I'm not going to pretend that grief made me noble. For 2 weeks after the funeral, I barely spoke to anyone. I went through the motions of work, came home, stared at my phone, didn't cry as much as I expected to because some part of me had been grieving her slowly for 4 years already. Then the lawyer called and asked Vanessa and me to come in together for the reading of the will. I almost didn't think anything of it. I assumed Eleanor had split things evenly, the way reasonable grandmothers do, the farmhouse sold and divided, some savings split down the middle, maybe a few personal items distributed with notes attached. I dressed plainly. I didn't expect a fight. I should have known better, because nothing involving Vanessa and money had ever gone the way reasonable people expect. The lawyer, a calm older man named Mr. Aldridge, who had handled Eleanor's affairs for over 20 years, opened the folder and read in the flat, careful voice lawyers use for documents that are about to detonate someone's life. To my granddaughter Vanessa, I leave the sum of $15,000, along with my mother's pearl earrings, which she always admired. Vanessa's face didn't change yet. She probably assumed there was more coming, that this was just the opening line of a larger gift. To my granddaughter Renata, I leave the farmhouse and surrounding 11 acres located at Birch Hollow Road, along with all contents therein, my investment accounts totaling approximately $410,000, and the remainder of my estate. The room went very still. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly. "I'm sorry, what?" Mr. Aldridge continued reading, unbothered, while I sat there with my hands going cold, because I hadn't known. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next only makes sense if you understand. I had genuinely, truly not known. Eleanor had left a letter attached to the will, and Mr. Aldridge read it aloud at her instruction. In it, she explained, gently, plainly, the way she explained everything, that she had watched one granddaughter show up for 15 years and another granddaughter show up for money, and that she wasn't interested in pretending those two things deserved equal weight just to keep peace in a family that had never given her any peace to begin with. She wrote that she loved Vanessa, that she hoped Vanessa would understand one day, but that love and inheritance were not obligated to be the same size. That was when Vanessa stood up. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising fast. She wasn't in her right mind. She turned on me, finger out. "You've been driving out there for years buttering her up, getting her alone, probably rewriting documents behind everyone's back. That house is worth $600,000. You expect me to believe a sick old woman just decided to give you everything?" "She wasn't sick in the mind, Vanessa. She was sick in the heart. There's a difference," I said, my own voice shaking. "And I never asked her for anything. I drove out there because I loved her." "You drove out there because you knew exactly what you were doing." Mr. Aldridge cleared his throat, unmoved by 20-some years of exactly this kind of scene. "Ms. Voss, this will was drafted with 2 independent witnesses and a competency evaluation conducted by your grandmother's physician 8 months ago, well after her diagnosis, specifically to prevent this exact dispute. I'd encourage you to review the documentation before pursuing anything further." Vanessa didn't review anything. She grabbed her purse, called me a manipulative liar one more time for the people in the hallway to hear, and stormed out. I sat there in the conference room afterward, alone, shaking, holding a folder that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I hadn't asked for any of this. I would have given every cent back just to have one more summer at that farmhouse with Eleanor still in it. But grief doesn't get a vote in inheritance law, and apparently it doesn't get a vote in family loyalty either. My phone started ringing before I even made it to my car. My mother. "What did you do?" she said. "No hello, no how are you holding up?" "Vanessa just called me sobbing. She said Grandma cut her out and gave you everything." "She didn't cut her out, Mom. She left her $15,000 and the pearl earrings." "Don't be smug, Renata." "I'm not being smug, I'm telling you the facts. I didn't know about any of this until 20 minutes ago." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that tells you someone is deciding which version of events is more convenient for them to believe. "Well, regardless," my mother finally said, "you need to do the right thing here. Split it with your sister. She has 2 kids. You don't even have a family yet." I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment, because it took me a full week to understand exactly how much it told me about my place in that family. You don't even have a family yet. As if the 15 years I'd spent driving 2 hours every weekend to sit with a dying woman, the 6 weeks I'd slept on a pull-out couch monitoring her oxygen levels, the hundreds of small private moments where I had simply shown up. As if none of that counted as anything, because I hadn't produced children to justify my existence. "I'm not splitting anything, Mom," I said. "Eleanor made her choice, I'm respecting it." "You're being selfish." "I learned from the best," I said, and I hung up, and I cried in my car for 20 minutes in a parking lot, not because I regretted what I'd said, but because some part of me had genuinely hoped, even after everything, that this might be the moment my family finally saw me clearly. It wasn't. It never had been. For 3 days, things were quiet. I assumed naively that the dust was settling. I drove out to the farmhouse that weekend to start sorting through Eleanor's things, mostly just to be in a space that still smelled like her, lavender and wood smoke, and the lemon oil she used on the kitchen table. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and stopped cold. The house had been gone through. Not robbed in the violent, smashed window sense. Gone through methodically by someone who had a key. Drawers left slightly open. The small lockbox where Alina kept her important documents, deed copies, old letters, a few pieces of jewelry too sentimental to wear sitting open and empty on the dining table. Her jewelry box upstairs, rifled through, several pieces. Missing, including a ring that had belonged to our great-grandmother, a ring Alina had specifically mentioned in a separate handwritten note as, for whoever needs reminding that she's loved when the time comes. I knew exactly who had a key. Vanessa had kept a spare from years ago, back when she used to check in on Alina whenever there was a holiday photo to take for social media. I'd forgotten she still had it. Apparently she hadn't. I called the police first, out of pure instinct, then immediately second-guessed myself and called Mr. Aldridge instead, because some small, soft part of me still didn't want to be the sister who called the cops on her own sister. He was blunt with me in a way I needed. "Renata, this is now a probate estate, and you are its legal executor. What was taken belongs to the estate. If you don't document this properly, you have no protection if it happens again." I called the police. 2 officers came out, took a report, dusted for prints on the lockbox more as procedure than expectation, and told me bluntly that without security footage or a confession, this would likely go nowhere unless I could prove who'd done it. I didn't need proof. I knew. But knowing and proving are different animals, and Vanessa had spent her whole life being slippery enough to know the difference too. That night my phone rang. "Vanessa. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice tight. "You broke into Alina's house." A pause. "I didn't break in, I have a key." "You don't have permission, which makes it breaking in regardless of whether you needed a crowbar." "I just took back what should have been mine in the first place," she snapped. "Mom's earrings? Fine, keep those, who cares, but great-grandma's ring? You don't even know the story behind that ring." "I do. I was there when Grandma told it to me when I was 12. She wrote down exactly who that ring was for, Vanessa. It wasn't a guessing game. She was manipulated." "Stop saying that. You weren't there." "I was there for 4 years of appointments and bad nights, and her forgetting words mid-sentence and crying because she was scared, and you weren't there for any of it, and now you want to stand in a courtroom and tell people she didn't know her own mind." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had shifted, gone smaller, sharper in a different way. "You always do this. You always make yourself the martyr. Poor unloved Renata, showing up every weekend like a saint. You think I don't know what you were doing? You were securing your spot. You knew exactly what you were building toward." I almost laughed, except it wasn't funny, it was just sad. I was 27 years old driving 2 hours every Saturday to give an old woman her insulin shots because nobody else would. If that's a long con, it's the worst paying long con in history. "Give the ring back," she said. "Give me my share of the house, or I swear I will make this as ugly and as public as I possibly can." "You already broke into a deceased woman's home and stole from a probate estate," I said. "It's already ugly. The only question now is how public you want it to get." She hung up on me. I won't pretend the next 2 weeks were easy. Vanessa did exactly what she promised. She posted on social media, vague enough to avoid naming names directly but specific enough that anyone in the family knew exactly who she meant, long paragraphs about people who manipulate the elderly for money, about fake granddaughters who only show up when there's something to gain, about being cut out of her own grandmother's legacy by someone who doesn't even deserve the name family. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started messaging me, some defending Vanessa, some quietly reaching out to ask what had actually happened, a few simply going silent the way people do when they don't want to pick a side and hope the problem disappears on its own. My mother sided with Vanessa publicly and texted me privately asking me to just let this go for the sake of peace, which had always been her solution to every problem our family ever had. Ask the person who'd been wronged to be quieter about it. I didn't let it go. I filed a police report that named Vanessa specifically, supported by the fact that only she and I had keys to the property, and I had been 2 states away with witnesses the night the break-in occurred. I gave Mr. Aldridge full documentation of the missing items for the estate inventory. And then I did something that surprised even me. I went to the one person in the family who had never picked a side in anything, my great Aunt Dot, Eleanor's younger sister, who was 83 years old and sharper than half the lawyers I'd ever met. Aunt Dot listened to the whole story over tea in her tiny apartment, nodding slowly, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug that had clearly seen 40 years of difficult family conversations, exactly like Thigh. S1. Eleanor told me what she was doing with that will, you know, Dot finally said, months before she signed it. She called me crying, not because she felt guilty, but because she felt sad that it had come to this. She told me, Dot, I raised 2 granddaughters and only one of them ever asked me how I was actually doing instead of what I was leaving behind. She knew exactly what she was choosing. She wasn't confused. She was heartbroken. Vanessa says she was manipulated. Dot snorted, an unexpectedly sharp sound from such a small woman. Vanessa says a lot of things that are convenient for Vanessa. I've watched that girl since she was 6 years old. She learned early that the loudest crier in the room gets the most comfort. It worked when she was a child. It stopped working the day Eleanor died, and she can't stand that the trick finally failed. Dot offered to write a sworn statement for probate court if it came to that. It did. Vanessa hired a lawyer and filed a will contest, claiming undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. I won't bore you with every procedural detail, only that it dragged on for months, that it cost both of us money neither of us wanted to spend, and that the entire time, I kept asking myself the same question. Did Eleanor know this would happen? Did she know that the gift she was giving me would come wrapped in a fight that would cost me my sister and half my family's goodwill? I think she did. I think that's exactly why she wrote that letter, and exactly why she had the physician's competency evaluation done 8 months before signing, and exactly why she told Aunt Dot everything in advance. She wasn't naive about her own family. She knew Vanessa, probably better than Vanessa knew herself. She built a fortress around that will specifically because she suspected this fight was coming. The hearing came in October. Vanessa sat across the courtroom from me in a navy blazer, looking composed, looking like a woman who had rehearsed her grief for an audience. Her lawyer made the case that a woman in declining health, recently diagnosed with mild cognitive symptoms, had been unduly influenced by a granddaughter who had isolated her from the rest of the family. Then Mr. Aldridge presented the physician's evaluation, dated 8 months before Eleanor's death, stating clearly that she demonstrated full testamentary capacity, understood the nature and extent of her assets, and articulated specific, consistent reasoning for her distribution choices across 2 separate consultations. Then he played something none of us were expecting. Eleanor, it turned out, had recorded a short video statement the same week she signed the will, something Mr. Aldridge routinely suggested for clients anticipating family disputes. On the screen, looking thinner than I remembered but utterly clear-eyed, Eleanor explained in her own words, calmly and without a hint of confusion, exactly why she was leaving the farmhouse to me. She talked about the insulin shots. She talked about the 6 weeks on the pull-out couch. She talked about Vanessa's 2 visits in 15 years, both involving requests for money. She said, looking directly into the camera like she somehow knew this exact room and this exact moment would happen, if anyone tries to say I didn't know my own mind when I wrote this will, I want them to watch this and understand. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was choosing the granddaughter who chose me first. The courtroom was silent. I watched my sister's face crumble in real time, watched the navy blazer composure dissolve into something raw and humiliated, because there is no surviving a recording like that. There's no spinning a dead woman's own clear voice telling you, gently but firmly, exactly why you weren't chosen. The judge dismissed the will contest within the week. Vanessa was ordered to return the stolen items to the estate, including the ring and the estate's legal fees, incurred specifically because of her contest, were ordered paid from her own inheritance, leaving her with almost nothing of the $15,000 Alina had originally left her. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt hollow mostly, the particular hollow feeling of winning a fight you never wanted to be in. Vanessa called me once more, 2 weeks after the ruling. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice was different, not apologetic exactly, but smaller, scraped down to something more honest than I'd heard from her in years. I lost almost everything paying for that lawyer, she said. Mom won't even talk about money with me now. She says I made the family look bad. Carl thinks I'm dramatic. Nobody's on my side anymore. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and I meant it, even though I knew it wasn't really an apology she was looking for. Can I ask you something? She said after a long pause. Did you hate me this whole time? I thought about it honestly. Why before I answered? No, I think I just got tired of being the only one who showed up. I didn't take that house from you, Vanessa. You were never trying for it until it was already gone. She didn't have a response to that. We sat in silence on the phone for almost a minute, two sisters who had grown up in the same house with the same parents and somehow turned into two completely different people. One who learned to perform for love and one who learned to simply do the work of it, quietly, without an audience. I don't know how to fix this, she finally said. I don't either, I told her honestly. But it starts with not breaking into houses that aren't yours. She actually laughed, a small, broken sound, the first genuine thing I'd heard from her in months. Fair. We're not close now. I won't pretend this story ends with some tidy reconciliation, two sisters hugging it out over Alina's old kitchen table while the credits roll. Vanessa and I talk maybe once every few months, careful, surface-level conversations that never go near money or Alina or that courtroom. My mother still thinks I should have split the inheritance, still brings it up at the rare family gathering I attend, still frames generosity as something owed rather than something given. But I kept the farmhouse. I moved in 8 months ago, planted tomatoes in Alina's old garden beds this spring, and some nights I sit on the porch where she used to sit, listening to the exact birds she always said she wanted to hear. And I think about how strange it is that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are so often the first ones to put a price tag on that love the moment something valuable is on the table. Alina used to say that family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shows up with their sleeves rolled up when things get hard. I used to think that was just something grandmothers say to make orphaned summers feel less lonely. I understand it differently now. She wasn't comforting a lonely kid. She was teaching me, slowly, over 15 summers, exactly what real love looks like, so that when the moment came to choose who deserved her legacy, I would already understand why the choice wasn't really about money at all. So tell me honestly, if you'd spent years showing up quietly while someone else only appeared when there was something to gain, would you have done what I did? Or would you have split it anyway, just to keep the peace one more time?